Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the Libertarian Party's conference call on outreach to gender and sexual minorities. My name is Jeff Mears. I'm going to be facilitating the call this evening. I'm a development coordinator for the Libertarian Party, and my role primarily involves raising funds to put the party in the best position financially for success in 2018 and 2020. We announce these calls via email, and we host them about every other week. So please make sure you are receiving emails from the Libertarian Party as they occasionally end up in your spam. We're very fortunate to have Mike Shipley as our guest speaker this evening. Mike Shipley has served on the board of the Outright Libertarian since 2013. He's an active Libertarian since 2006, and he founded the Pink Pistols chapter in Phoenix, Arizona. Over this past 10 years, he's established himself as a champion for the marginalized. He founded the Libertarian Caucus in 2014 and played a primary role in keeping the Outright at the forefront of the struggle for GSM liberation in a post-same-sex marriage world. He's going to have some information to go over at the beginning of the call. We'll take your questions shortly. Please submit your questions via email to jeff.mears@lt.org at any point during this call. Please keep your questions limited to 1 or 2 sentences. And at this point, I'm going to turn the call over to Mike. Good evening, Mike.
Hi, Jess. Thanks for the warm introduction, and it's so great to be on this call today. Hi, everybody who's listening. So let me jump right in. As Jess mentioned, I am the chair for Outright Libertarians. I've been the chair since 2014. Before that, I was the secretary. So I've been doing this for a while and established some expertise, and I'm really excited to get a chance to share that with libertarians today. So the first thing I want to touch on is that you may have seen that we're using this acronym GSM as opposed to the acronym LGBT. GSM stands for Gender and Sexual Minorities. So what we observed is that this the sort of status quo mainstream acronym, the LGBT, it has become very politicized, and it has become like almost like a weapon, right? So that the mainstream could decide who gets included and who doesn't, and it was substituting the power struggle over the letters in the acronym for actually dismantling the systemic harms that we face, right? So it wasn't really conducive to the libertarian worldview, because we don't really, I don't need a letter in the acronym to have rights. You know what I mean? Like, my rights don't come from the acronym. They come from being an individual. So we looked around and we identified GSM to be an acronym that really suits our purposes very well. So gender and sexual minorities. It's more inclusive and less absurd. It even allows us to embrace marginalized sexual and gender behaviors like sex work, kink communities, BDSM, and even polyamorous and polygamous. It even allows us to embrace things like genital autonomy. So, for instance, infant circumcision and mutilation of intersex infants. So all of those kind of fall under the scope. So it gives us a framework where we can we can speak to GSM issues through a libertarian lens and not get bogged down in the traditional LGBT sort of, identity thing. So let me go next into why we should fight for GSM votes. Why should the Libertarian Party care? Well, for one thing, GSM people are about 5% of the vote, and it's estimated that about half, again, that many, so a total of 7.5%, including our straight allies, can be mobilized to come out to vote when it counts. So these have been found through polling data to be accurate measurements of how many votes are out there that we can fight for and win. Now, I looked up a Gallup poll and I linked it in. There's a pinned post at the very top of the call page. So look at the pinned post. I posted the Gallup poll in there. And what it states is that, 44% of GSM people identifying with the Democratic Party, the 43%, which is basically the same within a margin of error, identify as independent. right? So that's a huge amount of people that can be scooped, right? Only 20% of them identify as conservative. So speaking of conservatives and pandering to conservatives, the dynamic on that has completely flipped in the past 10 to 15 years. So in 2004, George W. Bush and the neocons at the time were able to use same-sex marriage as a wedge issue, right? So they used that to get out the vote, and they were able to turn out religious conservatives to win that election. But by 2012, that dynamic was flipped. Mitt Romney attempted to use that same dynamic, and it backfired. So when they examined the numbers for that election, it was determined that GSM people and their allies had come out, and it had backfired on Romney. So that today, pandering to conservatives and the conservative vote and the homophobic, queerphobic, transphobic vote is a loser strategy. So that's good news for libertarians because that's not who we are. We believe in self-determination, personal autonomy, and individual rights. So our narrative is really well suited to GSM issues, in particular due to the fact that GSM people are disproportionately incarcerated by a factor of 3. So anything that has to do with the police state or, encounters with the enforcement arm of the state, those are issues that matter to the GSM community and issues that libertarians have the right answer on. So I'm going to touch on real quick some of the existing materials that we have, because as I mentioned, I took over in 2014, and since that time we've grown by a factor of 20. So at the time we had about 350 supporters. We now have over 7,000, and at the time we had a static budget in the hundreds, and now we have several thousand annually ongoing budget supporting outreach efforts, travel, printed materials that we now provide, which you just have to print by yourself. And we have a functioning infrastructure with outreach, fundraising, and policy teams. So when I took over, I made a decision not to play defense and apologize for the bad messaging that existed. And by that I mean sort of this narrative that if I use plural nouns or if I use adjectives to describe certain individuals, then suddenly I've done collectivism and poof, we're all going to be communists instantly because I said the word gay. That's bad messaging. That is telling individuals who exist in gay bodies, in queer bodies, in trans bodies, that they can only be an individual if they don't actually speak their name. And that's counterproductive to a message that is telling you that you have self-determination and personal autonomy. So I made a decision that we would no longer be the ones who are out there apologizing for these bad ideas. I decided that we were going to begin crafting GSM-specific messaging. So the very first thing that we did was we looked at we took the non-aggression principle, right, because that's the central thing, and that's the thing that we want to make sure that we're never on that slippery slope, right? That's the sort of North Star that protects us. So as long as we have that in view, then we're fine. So there's this Get Your Laws Up Our Back flyer, and I did post that. It's actually the top image in the post that I linked. So basically we went through all of the ways that GSM individuals encounter systemic oppression. And by the way, this flyer says LGBT because that was before we did the GSM thing, but just roll with it. So we did that, and so there's this giant list. So when you go to Pride events, or any other outreach setting where this might be helpful to you, this flyer, it helps introduce that narrative to a listener who might be accustomed to a sort of, like a single issue narrative like the Democrats are presenting. Our stated purpose as a mission for Outright is to be a bridge between the GSM community and the Libertarian Party. So at the Libertarian Party end, we're focused on non-aggression and dismantling those systemic barriers to the flourishing of the individual. But at the GSM end, we've got identity politics. We have the Democratic establishment dividing people up into groups and sort of focusing them on a single issue so that they don't look at the other, focus on this shiny object so, we can run around murdering people in your name, that kind of thing, right? So This flyer has been so helpful for that. And the other flyer we have is the world's gayest political quiz, and that's I linked that here too. So the world's gayest political quiz is a quiz on the world's smallest political quiz, and it was really cool how the rainbow like worked out to where the right wing was red and the left was blue and the libertarian was gold. Like it's beautiful, and you see it on there. You see it in how we created some questions that kind of take the get your laws off our back paradigm, and look at the world's smallest political quiz through that lens. So this flyer is like, it's printed front and back. So when you go out to a Pride event, you've got this tool that you can use to start those conversations. And we've had so much good feedback on this. It has been a really, it's been such a powerful tool for opening conversations. The other tool that we have now is, and we developed this in partnership with the Fully Informed Jury Association. It's a panel, like an outreach sort of, it's like a, like it's like a workshop or something that you can present, and it's called Querying the Jury. And what Querying the Jury is all about is taking this idea that we face so many systemic barriers that draw us into the enforcement system, right? So there are so many people, especially trans people in prisons who are, raped and murdered every day like nothing and just disposed of. And it's totally not okay. So a single citizen can get on a jury and shield that person from an unjust prosecution, right? Because there are policing disparities. Well, first there's the fact that I'm living in a world that tells me I don't even have a right to exist, right? So I'm drawn towards sort of self-destructive behaviors, right? And then I face disparate policing, then I face disparate sentencing, and then I face the prejudices of the jury and of the judge, and then I get into the prison where I may not even be housed with the right gender, and then I'm, being abused by both the inmates and the guards, right? So it's a really, disgusting thing that happens to GSM people in relationship to the state, right? So querying the jury is about really taking this sort of treasured idea that libertarians have been advancing for a very long time, which is jury nullification, the idea that a jury can find not guilty for any reason whatsoever, and letting GSM people and their allies know that we can actually protect our own community. And this can translate to other sort of minority issues, for instance, Black Lives Matter, or migrant communities, right? Anybody that would be disproportionately harmed by the state could be protected by this jury nullification worldview. So querying the jury has been another really powerful tool. And we are happy to present this. We'll come out to your event. We can also provide the printed materials for your Pride because I know Pride season is coming up. So if you need any of that, you can email our outreach director. Her name is Leslie Peterson, and her email is outreach@outrightusa.org. All right, so Judge told me I had 15 minutes, and I just realized I've talked for 13, but I think I've got about five minutes of material left, so I hope you'll bear with me for the extra 3. All right, so now I have a quick polite request. Stop nominating people who favor forced labor and without telling them that we exist and asking them to get with us first before they run around saying that libertarians support forcing people to bake cakes. We do not support that. We're not responsible for your choice to nominate those people. And it has made our job 1,000 times harder that now there are libertarians who actually think that it's our fault that someone was out there running around saying bake the cakes. Okay, I'm only going to say this once because I'm sick of saying it. It's not my job to keep saying it. We don't support forcing people to bake cakes. But I do have a narrative that can help you talk about this issue because it is a difficult issue for us to talk about. There's 2 great examples. One was a leather bar in Denver, so a place where gay and bisexual men gather to fetishize masculinity in a closed environment, right? So it got sued for gender discrimination by not allowing a drag queen in. So basically a feminized expression of a male body was, go figure, not admitted to a place where gay and bisexual men were there to fetishize masculinities, right? So, and they lost that case, right? So the leather bar was forced to violate its own dress code and start allowing drag queens in. Now, setting aside whether that's sexist or not, whether that's whether that's a product of living in a sexist world and internalizing, homophobia or whatever that is. That's beside the point. The point is that marginalized people have a right to control our spaces for our own comfort. And another great example of that is lesbian bars, right? So lesbians have a long history of being fetishized by straight men, right? So I don't know what it is about straight men who think that they are going to show up at a lesbian bar and they're just going to get to take on women two at a time or more at a time. That's not the case. Guess what? Lesbians don't like straight men, right? So they have a problem with that. And so lesbians, too, have a right to control their spaces to keep out sexual predators like that, right? It's okay for marginalized people to control our spaces for our own comfort. And that's a good reason to stand up for freedom of association. It's also a way to put that conversation on a winning territory versus a losing territory, which is, the denial of service. And I'm not even going to go there, of course, you have a right to deny service, but, being a bigot, it does not make you a particularly sympathetic character, so I'm just saying. Next. Sorry, I need to take a breath. Oh, I'm on a roll here. Which brings me to our 2018 election strategy, right? So up until now, we've been providing libertarian materials. We've been really going out there and having these conversations and letting you know that we exist and that there's a way to reach GSM people that's powerful and effective. But what we haven't really asked libertarian candidates to do is to really step forward and make GSM issues one of the centerpieces of their campaigns. And the reason why I think this is so valuable right now is because there's a huge uprising, there's a huge undercurrent on the left with independent-minded sort of Bernie types who just woke up to the fact that the establishment's screwing them over. And they're really in a space where they're interested in hearing something new, those 43% of independents that I talked about earlier, right? So we're asking that you pick up a narrative. And that narrative is get government out of gender, right? Get government out of gender. The government has no right to assign people a gender at birth and then compel them for their entire lives to conform to that gender by force, right? And why is this such an awesome thing? Well, for one thing, it solves the bathroom issue completely, right? And we do expect that the religious right is going to, beat this bathroom thing to death, right? That's one of their last dying hopes here, is that they can force you to believe that trans people are creeping around trying to abduct your children, and that's why they have to police restrooms with guns, right? So we know that that's false. Libertarians know that individual businesses can allow people into their restrooms according to their own choices, and that means they can let trans people if they want. They don't need the police to come in there and force them not to, etc. Abolishing gender as a state mandated compulsory construct is a powerful libertarian solution to that, right? And the really cool thing about it is it also allows us to call state documentation itself and the control grid and its database into question. Why am I being placed in a database at birth and then tracked all the way until my death? Why is that? Why am I being forced to carry around a document and present it on demand telling me what gender I am or anything else about myself? Why is that, right? So it's a really powerful framework for libertarian ideas to frame ourselves in a way that's appealing not only to GSM people, but to our allies, and which has a scope that can be broadened to encompass a wide variety of libertarian issues. So get government out of gender. We are really going to be pushing this narrative hard. We're asking candidates to pick this up and run with it. If you're running in a district where the Democratic vote is vulnerable, this is a for you, right? So we've got a questionnaire that's coming out. That's going to be our candidate questionnaire. And we're going to be asking you to pledge to pick up this issue and make it a part of your campaigns. And we really think that if the Libertarian Party strikes hard, we can win on these issues, right? And there's a host of other issues on the Get Your Laws of Our Backs, that can support having this in your campaign. So if you need any advice at all, you can reach out to me. I'll give you my email and my phone number in just a minute, so grab your pen. But before I say that, I want to say we will give you bonus points if you also mention polyamorous marriage equality, so basically plural marriages, in your campaigns. because obviously pushing the state out of marriages so that same-sex people can now get married was a good idea, but pushing it even farther out so that more than one gender can get married, or more than two, or more than whatever gender, that's a great thing too. All right. So I'll give you my email and phone number now. It's chair@outrightusa.org, and my phone number is 602-492-4201. I'm happy to give you any advice that you'd like for your campaign. Reach out to me, how we can work together, connect you with activists on the ground if you need people to staff your pride table. And last, if you found what I said to you today compelling and you want to support our work, you can get a free rainbow Gadsden flag by joining our caucus. So you can go to outrightusa.org/2017-membership, and I placed that link in the pinned post as well. Join us for $30, and we will send you a flag. And then you can fly it proudly at your prize or wherever you want. All right, I'm done.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Hey, everyone that has joined the call since we kicked it off. We do have everyone muted, but we would so love to have your questions asked, and Mike will answer them. We'll be going over Q&A for about 40 minutes. So please submit your questions to jeff.mears@lc.org. That should be an email reminder that I sent out about 30 minutes before the call. So Mike, here's the first question that was submitted. What are pride festivals, and why should libertarians table at them?
So the concept of pride came out of, the pride as an organizing principle came out of the idea of denying the right to force us to live lives of shame, right? So pride is saying I have a right to exist, I have a right to walk the streets just like everybody else, and I'm not going to be compelled back into a closet, to live a life in the shadows, in order so that you can continue to be comfortable in your existing sensibilities, right? So we don't have to conform to mainstream culture to have a right to exist, right? So that's why Pride became a festival, right? And it started as political marches in the 70s. Like it was basically a show of numbers. It was a march in the streets. But over time, it kind of morphed into these pride parades and the festivals that happen. So it really is a celebration of the individual. It's a celebration of my right to self-determination, my right to personal autonomy, and my right to be who I am, as long as I'm not harming anybody, of course, without answering to you. Like, I don't need your permission to be gay or queer or trans or whatever I am. Like, I don't need your permission for that. I'm allowed to have a festival. And it's a great place for libertarians to actually engage with hopefully libertarian, but GSM voters who are in a space where they are, it's a political moment. It's a moment where we are celebrating our victories and our dignity, right? So it's a really effective place to do outreach to register voters. If you're having a campaign, you can take your candidate, you can, exhibit as a candidate. So it's a really great and effective place to do that.
Okay, here is the next question from Bo Brown. How can allies become better allies to the GSM community?
So one of the best ways is to kind of pick up some of the educational weight, right? So one of the biggest drains on our energy and resources is continually having to explain really basic things like whether or not transgender women are just men in dresses, or whether or not your children are in danger because a transgender person needed to go pee, right? Or whether or not having a pride festival is, a communist plot to take over, the Libertarian Party or whatever, So in other words, when you see these bad narratives and you see these harmful narratives that are actually contradictory to libertarian principles, really step forward and go ahead and feel free to, pick up your rainbow flag and run with it, You don't need to be a GSM person yourself to speak a GSM positive narrative. Of course, at the same token, you don't want to like talk over people. So if there's, if there's a transgender person speaking, then, we don't sort of, I guess, fist-blame into that space, if you will. I don't know if that's higher level vocabulary. But anyway, so just, get in the trenches and fight with us is the takeaway from that. The best way to be an ally is to actually actively put effort into being an ally, and which would include, for instance, being a candidate who brings get government out of gender into your campaign.
Here is a question from Adam Kokesh. I love the GSM terminology. It's also nice that it could be said to technically describe anyone. How widely is it being used? And an additional question, have there been any other jury nullification outreach efforts in GSM communities?
Okay, so to answer the first question, GSM is in use in sort of countercultural, maybe sort of radical queer spaces. And so libertarians aren't the only ones who question sort of mainstream liberal narrative. There's a significant undercurrent of radical queer efforts on the left, and GSM is, I wouldn't say it's universally used in those spaces, but definitely more commonly than LGBT is used. LGBT is very much like the mainstream acronym. But we drew it from history, so it's kind of like, it's almost like a retro 70s throwback thing. Basically what was happening is they were using it in the beginning, and there were a number of different terms at the time, and then the one that became predominant was the one that served the sort of status, what became the liberal left policies. But GSM was a throwback to that. It has been used throughout, and so basically we're sort of bringing it back, making it new again, and hoping to bring it forward and popularize it. So we've had a good response. People are using it more now than ever. And your other question about jury nullification. So we've done the queering the jury at, let's see, Leslie did it at one of the Students for Liberty conferences. And I think it was Blue Ridge in North Carolina. I did it as a webinar with Kirsten Tynan of the Fully Informed Jury Association. We did also present it just a couple of weekends ago at the Libertarian State Leadership Alliance, Libertarian LSLA conference in New Hampshire. So we left there and we presented it there. And I believe Leslie's going to be presenting it at Porkfest next month. So we've been continuing to roll it out. We can provide you the materials if we're, for whatever reason, we're not able to travel there, you're not able to bring us there. We can provide you the materials, and you could just schedule a room and present this yourself and market it to GSM audiences. It's going to help if you have GSM people locally to speak kind of in their voice on that panel, so in other words, that's a really great way to put something out there and to try to attract a GSM audience, and then hopefully have them see that libertarian ideas can have a really powerful way to set them free.
Okay, here is a question from Bruce Wilson. First of all, he wanted to thank you for being a Second Amendment advocate, and he also can say from his personal experience that the voice from the GSM/LGBTQ community is leftist. He would like to know what you propose as being the top 3 issues that are of concern to the GSM community that have common ground within the LP.
So I'm going to say that the get government out of gender thing is really a good one for us right now to step into that space and actually fight on that battleground. And the reason why is because the sort of social conservatives are attempting to use the policing power in restrooms to control them, to push transgender people out, right? And then, so the liberal left is, and it's, the jury, it's up to you which one you think is reactionary and which one you think is the one instigating this. But from the liberal left, right, their narrative is like, oh, will use state documents to save you, right? So they want to make it easier for you to change things on your ID, and I guess that's, it's an okay incremental solution. It doesn't really actually question why the documents exist, why I should be compelled by force to conform to them, or anything, right? So we have a winning narrative on this issue, and it reaches out in a lot of directions from there. So I would say that that's number one, not only from what is powerful, not only what our philosophy has to offer, but where the mainstream is at. The next one I would say is probably immigration policy, right? So what's going on around the world is that, there's a lot of places where there's been a lot of warfare going on, and radical sort of, influences are filling the power vacuum left behind, right? And they're starting to throw people off roofs, and, it's also happening in places like Russia where it's become like sport, basically to lure gay men in through social media and then to YouTube videos of abusing them, right? So queer bashing is incredibly popular in Russia right now, right? And so what does this mean for migration policy? Well, that means people are going to be fleeing persecution in these places. And when we have the existing border control policies are like way too strict, right? Like it's really hard to come here and become safe, right? And some of the ways that they are screening people do have to do with whether you're a political undesirable or not, right? And then if I do get thrown in immigration detention, I'm going to be, treated very poorly, in particular if I'm a GSM person. So we have a lot to offer on that stage with our either extremely relaxed or completely open border policy. So there's that. A third one. I don't know if the mainstream is going to really expect us to go there. So I really feel like the polyamorous marriage equality thing, we can build bridges into so there are a lot of people living a polyamorous lifestyle. Like it's not an uncommon family arrangement, right? And the left, what I'm seeing is aren't really going to touch that. But we have always wanted to get government completely out of marriage. So it was a good thing that the prohibitions were struck down on same-sex monogamous marriage. That was great. That pushed the state out. But in real incrementalist fashion, we want to keep pushing the state out, right? We want to keep adapting that line, right? So the next thing to fall could be the prohibition on plural marriages, right? So I think polyamorous marriage equality would be a winning one for us too, because I don't think either the left or the right are going to be prepared for that dialogue, and I think that's a great way to sort of put them on the defensive.
Here is a question from Martin. He is going to be at the Capitol Pride Festival this weekend, that's going to be in D.C. He would like to know, is there anyone that can help them fund or staff the table with materials and voter registration information?
I'm going to say probably. Well, so we do try to sort of mirror that autonomy thing from national, right? So I can't just pick up the phone and tell people in that area to go work on your booth. All I can say is that almost universally people are excited to get asked, right? So I can look into it for you. As far as funding, reach out to me with an email, chair@outrightusa.org, and we'll see what we can do.
Okay, here is a question from John Taylor, and he has a surgical practice that treats about 20 to 30 transgender patients a year. He would like to reach out to them with more libertarian ideas, but there's a few things in the healthcare arena that make this difficult. One of them is that most of them are supportive of the liberal agenda that mandatory coverage for certain conditions is a good thing, namely sex reassignment procedures. And the older patients have been through the cash pay surgical care system in the past, and they don't like it. And the third thing he's noticed is that many have faced difficulties with healthcare access in the past, so they're very supportive of the strict anti-discrimination laws with strict penalties. What are your thoughts?
So I think one of the most obvious reasons why people gravitate towards the liberal mainstream narrative is that mainstream liberals are the only ones who have really made a positive effort to even present GSM positive material into that space, right? So libertarians have known that our ideas are stronger, but we haven't really put that in the forefront, right? What we've been putting in the forefront is, oh, you're an individual, but you can't be gay because if you say gay, it's collective. So we don't want to talk about that, right? Well, if you don't talk about it, then how can people know what your solution is? So I think that's kind of on us that we haven't done a good job of letting people know how our ideas are better. So speaking of how our ideas are better, for one thing, not every transgender person is necessarily wanting to transition. In some cases, they are making that choice because they're being compelled in order to get their state ID to actually match the gender that they are living as, right? So there's an introduction of state force there. And then the other one is the way that the government has completely monopolized the healthcare and the insurance industry. So one of the primary reasons why the healthcare is so costly to access and why everybody would rather have the insurance is because it has inflated the prices astronomically, right? So why would I pay retail for something when it's the government has monopolized it to like such an expensive rate? Of course, people are going to buy into the state healthcare paradigm. So yeah, we're going to dismantle that, but by doing so, the prices are going to go back down, right? So that's a really good thing. It's going to make that healthcare accessible. The other thing I wanted to tell you is that the question of whether the reassignment surgeries is actually healthcare or not, that's really rooted in a conservative idea of whether transgender people have a right to exist or not, right? So basically, if I'm experiencing gender dysphoria, then I need healthcare for that, and healthcare could be the reassignment, right? So if I have insurance and I have any other health condition, I should be able to get insurance. Of course, as soon as it covers, right? So in other words, my insurance should cover the conditions that I have as long as I've agreed to, and I know, I get it that each individual insurance contract will be different, of course. I'm not, like, questioning that. And in a free market in healthcare, of course, some policies would cover trans healthcare and some wouldn't. But the underlying question is whether it's even healthcare or whether it's some kind of a cosmetic thing that isn't really necessary for the person's health. And what we have found is that it is. Forcing somebody to live with dysphoria is it's like forcing them to live with any other condition that could be treated, right? So there's a treatment for that, and the treatment for some is sex reassignment. And if that is the treatment for me, then that is the health care for me, and I should be able to get insurance for that. Did that make sense?
I think so. We will are ready to move on to another question.
Yeah.
Okay, here is a question from Susan. How many transgendered or TS candidates has the Libertarian Party fielded in 2015 or 2014? And did the party help them as GSM candidates?
You've stumped me on that one. We haven't had I guess I'll put it this way, we don't necessarily, for one thing, we don't do endorsements. We are a 501c4 educational nonprofit, so we don't do endorsements. What we do is our questionnaire, and then we educate the public about which candidates are favorable and which ones aren't. And then sort of the companion explanation to that is that we supporting candidates costs a lot of money, right? And so we have more money than we did in the past, but we don't have like a lot of money. So I guess what I'm trying to say with that is that candidates don't always really self-report to us that they exist. So I can't really tell you with any certainty whether or not there were transgender candidates who ran. I feel like I want to tell you that I heard of at least one, but I don't recall clearly. So, yeah, that's my answer on that.
Okay, here is the next question from Martin. Would you please talk about how the LP would message embracing nudists?
How would we message embracing nudists?
And he has some more comments. I'll go ahead and read those. I think a lot of older, straight, lifestyle, swinger, polyamorous individuals and nudists, clothing-free communities, couples would embrace the LP if when including them without alienating our conservative traditional marriage members and voters.
Wow, I love that. Whoever said that is really smart. So I will say that nudism would definitely fall under the GSM umbrella. I can also say that I haven't put a lot of thought into that. I do know that I believe, was it Colorado recently where I could be wrong about the state, where they had a judge had decided that that it was a gender equality thing for women to be able to go topless just like men can, right? So the free the nipple thing, and that's definitely in the spirit of libertarianism. I do think they're onto something that with the prevalence of social conservatism and the idea that sexuality and human bodies are still, in a stigmatized space. I don't think nudism is likely to be legalized tomorrow, but I do think it's more likely to be legalized than not, the more that we talk about it. So what I'm going to do is write down actually I already did write down the word nudist, and I'm putting a star next to it right now, because I'm going to carry that back to our team and see what we can do with it, because I really like that you brought that forward. It's a really good idea. Thank you.
Here is a question from Rob. What do you say to people, especially younger people who are post-gay or post-gender and against labels? How do you convince them that identity-based outreach is okay?
Well, so the way I deal with that is I just kind of make sure to let's have some perspective here. They're just adjectives, right? So language is just a tool. It can be weaponized, but there are lots of things that politicians weaponize all the time. And we're fighting on an ideological battleground where we're encountering rhetorically weaponized ideas. It goes with the territory, right? So when I use an adjective, when I describe myself as a gay man, I'm just telling you about a part of my experience. And, if I'm going to explain how, I was in an adult bookstore and the cops raided it and I was dragged out with, with my pants unzipped, right? That was humiliating for me. Then describing myself as a gay man, it's part of that experience, right? I wouldn't, of course, straight men are, don't get me started. Not uncommon in adult bookstores. But anyway, I digress, right? We haven't done communism or collectivism inherently just because we use an adjective. So what I do is I just really make sure to explain. Just because I use a word doesn't mean it doesn't have any more power than I give it, right? It's just an adjective. It's just a plural noun, right? However I'm using it, it's just a word, right? So there's that.
Okay, here is a comment from Martin. It's regarding bathrooms. The free market and new business owners who want to reach the widest possible audience have already spearheaded new bathrooms which create communal hand washing areas outside of private stalls. Each stall accommodates only one person, like many traditional restrooms, thus no one is offended. Can Mike address how the free market business people who like making money and not offending people solve this?
Well, I'm glad you brought this up because I live in Arizona, which is considered a red state, although I think of it more as like a gold state, although they don't know it because it's very, if it is a red state, it's very much in the old sort of very Goldwater spirit of a red state, right, which I think is more libertarian, but anyway, that's not the actual question. That's about bathrooms, right? So what I've observed in navigating the marketplace in Phoenix is that the majority of businesses, and we don't have a public accommodation law here, so like those aren't protected, so like businesses here can do whatever they want and deny service. But businesses have, from what I've seen, in almost any place, I mean, I don't have data, I don't like keep notes as I'm walking around, but I've observed that in most businesses where they do have single-use restrooms, they've already voluntarily gone over to either a gender-neutral or gender-neutral or what's the bi-gender, whatever. Either it has a man and a woman picture, little stick figure on the door, or they've come up with some other creative sort of, like I went to a coffee shop the other day and their bathrooms were labeled number 1 and number 2, which I thought was completely like creative way of handling the fact that like, okay, we have two restrooms, you pick which one you want to use, right? The bathrooms that this person does, that Martin just described, the ones with the single-use stalls and the common washing area, I haven't seen any of those here in Arizona, but I've seen that they do exist, and I just think that as time goes on, right, we're going to see more of that. I think that oftentimes social change is ahead of political change. Political change is a reflection of a change that has already occurred socially, right? So I just think that, bigotry is out, transphobia is out. I know it's popular with politicians who are trying to use it as a sort of fear-mongering tactic, but it's really not popular with ordinary people. And I think that businesses are tipping onto the fact that if they want to sell in this marketplace, they're going to have to be inclusive.
Okay, here is the next question from Marshall. Do we embrace marriage equality or the abolition of state licensing of families? As a platform issue, are we willing to say that a private domestic partnership contract between 2 or more parties of any gender, making private contract equal to marriage?
So when the Supreme Court struck down the marriage bans, that was an abolition. So it didn't make new law, it struck down old law. So it was incremental movement towards complete freedom of marriage. The Libertarian Party platform says that the government has no right to define license, so those are the marriage licenses. It doesn't have the right to define those are licenses, I should say, or restrict. So in a single sentence, the government does not have the right to define a license or restrict. It affirms both that marriage should be completely abolished, but also that as long as it exists, it should not be restricted to specific types of either arrangements or genders. So outright would favor, I don't know if that was a question. Yeah, we want to get government out of marriage just like everybody else does. But I do like to say this too, that even when it's a private contract, those contracts, the whole point of a contract is so that if there's a dispute, then the contract should be brought forward and then justice according to the contract is part of why that exists, right? So either the government or a government-like entity, should government cease to exist one day, will still be involved in marriage. It's just not going to have the licensing aspects, right? So if I'm in a dispute with my co-randomness, family, which could easily happen, right, I'm still going to have to come to a justice type body to enforce the terms should the terms be broken, right? So there's always that tiny little thing of like where like the only way to not have the state involved at all is to just never even make such an arrangement at all and just kind of, cohabitate. Which is cool too if that's your voluntary choice.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes left, and we still have some more questions to get to. And feel free to keep submitting them if you do have a question that you would love to ask. Here's one from Emily. Given that many GSM people are low income or financially unstable due to discrimination in contact with the criminal justice system, what frameworks can libertarians use to reach out to GSM voters who believe that libertarian policies don't address the intersection between being GSM and living in poverty?
So I think one of the huge blind spots in our messaging is that we don't really uphold the power of mutual aid solutions, right? So in the 19th century, there were mutual aid societies, and even in the very beginning of the 20th century, before the welfare state really took over, there was an incredibly robust social network system that was voluntarily supported through, and there were mutual aid societies that focused on homelessness, right? And there were ones that focused on communities of color, and there were ones that in the various different migrant communities, and those services were incredibly resilient. Like they helped a lot of people, right? And so as the welfare state grew, it began to sort of just, it replaced that with basically like a nonprofit industrial complex. So today, your 501c has all these different things that like it can't actually do, and then we call that charity, right? And then everyone else has to be funneled into the welfare state, right? So modern Americans don't know anything else, right? So of course they're going to think that if you abolish the welfare state, nobody will take care of the poor. And I like Emily has brought this forward in particular because GSM youth do tend to get kicked out of their homes if they live in religious conservative homes. In fact, that was part of my lived experience. I lived through that too. So the thing of homeless GSM youth, like that's a thing, right? But what I would suggest is that the community knows that that's a thing. And actually, you didn't ask about HIV, but the AIDS scare in the 80s was a very recent example of when a mutual aid network rose to meet a need where the state was not equipped or actually was not even willing to address that issue, right? So there are still some really strong HIV care support networks that are voluntarily funded. And so that's a really recent example. But I think the community, so we're so accustomed to being pushed to the side and to the margins and being shut out that, I believe that solutions like that would arise to help GSM youth. But it's our job to articulate what that really looks like, right? And this kind of goes back to earlier what I said about, putting aside old narratives that don't work. Like the poor shaming narrative, the thing about how poor people are lazy and, they chose that. That would be true if we lived in a completely free market that was a meritocracy, but we don't live in that market. We live in a market that has been monopolized in so many different ways and is regulated and controlled in so many ways that it's producing poverty, right? So the people that are in poverty today are not there because they necessarily chose it. They're there because the state manufactured that so that it could centralize the wealth into itself. See what I mean? So there's a really powerful, you would almost call that like a classical liberal narrative, right? That an egalitarian system of law, an egalitarian system that allowed everybody equal access to the marketplace would tend to distribute wealth more equally, right? So it's just a matter of us expressing that and really taking hold of the idea that our message is for the people who are currently experiencing fiscal disprivilege because they're the ones that have the most benefit from a free market.
Okay, and I think we are out of questions. We have some more that were submitted, but they're more points of information or comments. Mike, do you have anything else you would like to talk about for the next 5 minutes?
For the next 5 minutes. Well, I'm really good at just rambling, but I feel like, I've covered a lot of information in this thing. I guess just to touch on the points, GSM votes are worth fighting for. There's a lot of them, and many of them are open to new ideas. We have a really strong narrative that can fight and win on this battleground. Outright Libertarians has provided some materials that can help, including the Get Your Laws Off Our Backs flyer and the World's Gayest Political Quiz. We also have the Querying the Jury outreach workshops we can present, so reach out to our outreach officer at outreach@outrightusa.org. If you ever get asked about cakes, don't even go there. Take it to the les bar example or the lesbian bar example, because that places it on an empowering footing for marginalized people. And if you're going to be a candidate in 2018, we strongly encourage you. We're really going to be advancing this idea that the LP has a lot to gain by taking up this idea of getting the government out of gender and really running with it. Like, I really believe that we can put the old parties on the defensive with this, and that we can fight and win, especially in districts where the Democrat is vulnerable. So, yeah, watch for our candidate questionnaire that's coming up. You do get bonus points for polyamorous marriage equality, so that's our number 2 issue. And one thing, I will mention this too, because I noticed as I was talking that I didn't touch on this much, but sex work is one of our, in fact, this almost goes back to the financial, so, and especially transgender people who experience workplace discrimination at the highest rates, do find that as a scarcity source, they have a market value as sex workers, right? That's just economics, right? So, sex work obviously crosses over into straight communities, and it's one of our issues, and it's, you know, legalizing prostitution has been around in libertarian spaces for a long, long time too. So I want to make sure that because for whatever reason it didn't come up in any of my other points. So that's the thing. If that resonates with you, that's a really good GSM issue to pick up and run with. And get a flag. Get one of these rainbow Gadsden flags and take it to your Pride event. You can get it on our website. Just click on the banner. And last but not least, reach out to me if you have any questions, because that's my job. And I'm pretty much at my desk all the time. If not, I answer my phone. If I'm sleeping, I turn it off. The rest of the time I'm here. So just email me, chair@outrightusa.org. And my phone number is 602-492-4201. And I'll close with this. We are so grateful that the Libertarian Party exists. We are so kind of proud of that, our political culture that has been such strong allies for so long. Like some of the original founders of the party are some of the same people that were veterans of the original GSM liberation movement. So the Libertarian Party has really been the home for GSM liberation from the beginning. I mean, yeah, the mainstream left stole it, whatever, but, you know, we can have it back. But we're just glad that you've been in this fight with us from the beginning, and we are proud to be in this fight with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time and your insight, Mike. And tomorrow morning we can send out a follow-up email with the documents that Mike has referenced, as well as his contact information. That way you have that in an email tomorrow morning. All right. Anything else tonight, Mike?
No. Thank you so much for setting this up, and just thank you. This was great. I really enjoyed doing this.
Thank you, Mike. All right. Everybody have a good night, and thank you for participating.
Good night.